We have in our minds all the time what happened in Germany, but what happened in Russia was destructive, both physically and spiritually. And when we think about the role of Russia in the persecution of the Jews since the 18 and 1900s and into the 20th century, then we can understand the opening words of Ezekiel's prophecy. When he says, "And the word of Hashem came to me, saying, Son of man, put your face against Gog in the land of Magog, the prince and the head of Meshech and Tuval." Well, what is this kingdom of Magog? In Genesis, Parashas Noach, where the Torah gives us the genealogies of the sons of Noach, Shem, Ham, and Yafet, we see that Magog is the son of Yafet. We know that Noah's Ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, which is in eastern Turkey. And the choice lands running westwards from Turkey across Greece and Italy, the choicest lands of Europe, all were taken first by the children of Yafet, who was the firstborn of Noah. The cursed Ham was sent down to Africa, to Egypt, to further south, and Shem had the lands in the middle, including Eretz Yisrael, the land of Canaan. So Magog is the senior wing of the descendants of Noah that became what we call the Indo-Europeans. And Gog is said to be the prince and the head of Meshech and Tuval. Well, who can hear what Meshech is? What phoneme comes to mind when you put those Hebrew letters, Mem, Shin, Chof together? Moshka, Moskva, Moscow, Meshech. It's exclusively brought down in commentators on Talmud Yerushalmi Yuma, which speaks about some of the nations mentioned in these texts, where Meshech is identified with Russia. What is the name of the capital of Georgia? Huh? Georgia. Tbilisi. Well, Tbilisi. It is precisely in those areas between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea that these nations were focused. Where did one of the biggest arch persecutors of Jews come from to rule over all of Russia? Georgia. Stalin came from Georgia. That is not to say that we have to make explicit identifications of the names mentioned in the prophetic texts with those areas today, because just as the Jews have been migrating all over the world, so there have been all kinds of other migrations across Europe, from Europe to the Americas, to Australia, to Africa, and so on and so forth. But we have certainly seen how Russia and the Russian orbit have been among the persecutors of Jews and among the obstacles in the way of the settlement of Israel. Who was Egypt's biggest backer in 1967 when Nasser closed the Tiran Straits to Israeli shipping? Russia was the backer of Egypt. But now, among the other countries that are mentioned here are Paras and Cush and Phut. Paras, of course, is Persia. The identification of Cush is a little difficult. There's a Gemara in Megillah where the Amoraim discuss the verse that says that Ahasuerus ruled Mihodu va'ad Cush, from Hodu to Cush. And one Amora says, well, this comes to emphasize the extent of his empire, which stretched all the way from Hodu, from India, to Cush, to Ethiopia. But the other Amora says, no, Hodu and Cush are right adjacent to each other. And just like Achashverosh ruled with his thumb over Hodu and Kush, which are right by each other, he ruled over the whole 127 provinces. Well, if Kush is next to Hodu, that would make it pretty much Pakistan and Afghanistan. So when we have Paras and Kush mentioned among the main nations in this alliance, we have, together with Russia, we're seeing the alignment, the international alignment of countries that would be together if all the cards came down. There is a Targum that identifies Kush with Arab, Arabia. Kush is the son of Ham, and it appears that it was the children of Ham who were chosen to become those who came under the wing of Ishmael and accepted the Ishmaelite religion. And this would be another connotation of Kush in our verse. What we are seeing here is among the leaders of the generations of growing assault on Israel on every level. We see it day after day in the United Nations and in all other international forums that steadily, year by year and month by month, Israel is being marginalized ever more and ever more. And we must not imagine that the war of Gog and Magog is a Hollywood-style battle epic. There are many levels of war. There is a war of attrition, there is the war of nerves. And the perception in Israel is that whether there is officially a war or not, we are on a war footing all the time. On the physical level, but also on what is not appreciated. We're so caught up in the ideological war that we don't even realize that it's a war. We have fallen victim to the propaganda of our enemies, to the point that many Jews completely accept the viewpoint of the so-called Palestinians, just because it has been endlessly repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. I remember when I was a student in Cambridge University in Britain in the late 1960s and early 1970s, our college had a number of Palestinian students, self-proclaimed Palestinian students, who would be with everybody in the students' canteen and talking. And I remember back then beginning to hear the same narrative that we have all been hearing again and again and again about the suffering of the Palestinian people, about the expulsion of the Palestinian people, about the persecution, about the discrimination. We've been hearing this narrative over and over again. And any and every Jew living in Israel knows that this is not true. It is simply not true that what the media have created is an inverse image of what actually happened for centuries and centuries and centuries to the Jews. And now, just because the Jews have returned to our land, this image is being thrown against them to say, well, now you've turned into the oppressor. And we see here an enormous psychological attack on Israel, an attack on the right of Israel to occupy the land of Israel. This is precisely what the United States Secretary of State has in mind when she says that all settlements must stop. Every Jew knows that the Torah defines for us the boundaries of Eretz Israel from the river to the river, from the river Nile and to the river Euphrates, which is the entire eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean, all the way from Egypt up through present-day Medinat Israel, the state of Israel, up through Lebanon, up through Syria, up right into Turkey,